and generosity of your welcome, and it's a great opportunity to talk to and hear from students and faculty members in the university. I ought to start by saying that it is an especial privilege to visit Lithuania for the second time. I did so for the first time whilst an active party politician, but before my election to Parliament. I was elected to the British House of Commons in 1997, but in August 1992, but 2 years and a few months after your renewed independence, I came with a friend who is also now a member of the British House of Commons, at the behest and under the auspices of the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, to engage with and to presume to offer some organisational and campaigning advice to party politicians seeking to grip the new realities of a pluralist democracy 2 decades ago. And although it was a thrilling and nourishing experience on that occasion, I hope you will not take offence if I say that at that time, so shortly after you had escaped from the communist yoke, the country resembled a second world nation, if you will. It wasn't at developing country or third world level, but it had not ratcheted up to the sort of status and progress to which it aspired or which it has since attained. And it is an absolute delight to come back here the best part of 21 years later and to observe almost in a flash within minutes of arrival just how radically transformed beyond recognition for the better your country is after 2 decades of democratic stewardship and open engagement with citizenry in pursuit of shared goals of greater prosperity and increased empowerment and bolstered public service provision and the like. So it's great to be able to come to Lithuania again and to meet my opposite number, my counterpart, I hope my friend, Mr. Speaker, but also Her Excellency the President, His Excellency the Prime Minister, and many other parliamentarians in the course so far of the day. I came from Berlin, where I was visiting my opposite number there as well. Our Parliament is not sitting this week, ladies and gentlemen, and that gives me the excuse or the opportunity to visit abroad. The British Speaker cannot really travel when the House of Commons is sitting because the Speaker is expected to be present in the chamber. And in order to be absent, a motion has to be put to and passed by the House of Commons. And you understand that with the British media being what it is, it's simply not worth the candle, if you understand that expression. It's simply too much hassle for me to think about travelling when Parliament is in session, because the motion will have to be put and people will say, well, where is the Speaker going? By what means is he travelling? Is he going business class or first class or just economy? And in what hotel is he staying? Is it 5-star? What is on the menu? For how many days will he be staying? What is his work schedule? How many meetings is he actually having? What are they discussing? Is there a swimming pool at the hotel and will he be using it? Etc, etc, etc. The questions go on and on and on. And so the simple answer is it is much better simply to travel when Parliament isn't sitting, and that's what I do. But when I do travel, not only actually when I travel abroad, but when I travel in the United Kingdom, I do like, amongst other things, to get round schools, colleges and universities and to come to what is an historic and renowned seat of learning in the University of Vilnius, and to be reminded forcibly of the fact of a history that dates back 434 years, is to be reminded of the historic interest in and commitment to study, to learning, to research, to civilization in your country, which has periodically and rudely been interrupted either by dictatorship or conquest or tyranny of one sort or another. But I hope you feel that just as generations of students before you have profited from study at the University of Vilnius, whatever your discipline, so you too will gain greatly from it. Before I say something about the role of the Speaker in the United Kingdom, how Parliament is reforming, and in what way I have sought and am seeking and will seek to add to the functions of the Speaker in the British context, I think it only right that I deal at the outset, Mr. Director, colleagues, with one quite sensitive matter, which I think your natural courtesy will probably disincline you to raise with me directly, but which, if unaddressed, will lurk mischievously and perhaps from my vantage point perilously in the undergrowth, and which I judge therefore needs to be knocked on the head before I proceed any further. And that is the sensitive matter of height. Very specifically, it is often suggested, almost pervasively so, in the more down-market parts of the British press, that I am the shortest man ever to be Speaker. And I just want to say to vertically challenged people in the audience that this is nothing of which to be ashamed. Size is not everything. We may be small, but indeed perfectly formed. And we short people should stick together. Colleagues, I am short. Last month I turned 50 years old, and I remain short, and in view of the known impact of the aging process upon physiognomy, the overwhelming likelihood is that I shall become inexorably and irrevocably shorter still. And about the fact of that continued and soon to be exacerbated shortness, I am entirely relaxed. But I'm not relaxed about the matter of historical accuracy, and if you know anything about the history of the office in any country of Speaker, you will expect surely the Speaker to have done his research, and in that respect at least I hope not to disappoint you. I have done, and simply as a matter of historical fact, these scribblers in the more down-market journals in the United Kingdom who say, well, Bercow is the shortest man ever to be Speaker, are wrong. Sir John Bussey, Speaker of the House of Commons, from 1394 to 1398, Sir John Wenlock, Speaker of the House of Commons from 1455 to 1456, and Sir Thomas Tresham, Speaker of the House of Commons in 1459, are all believed to have been shorter than I am, although I do have to admit that this was true only after all three of them had been beheaded. Indeed, no fewer than 7 of my predecessors met their end on the executioner's table. One was killed in battle, and a further poor unfortunate soul was brutally murdered. So you will understand that this does enable me to view the present woes and challenges which afflict and confront the United Kingdom House of Commons with an appropriate sense of historical proportion. That is to say, whatever else happens to me, I am not likely to lose my head. And I am genuinely delighted to be with you. Of the subject of European integration and Britain's relations with the Union, I do not intend in this initial talk to deal, other than to say that, of course, it did feature in my conversations with Lithuanian parliamentary colleagues today, as it did indeed yesterday and on Monday in my conversations with German parliamentary colleagues. And I think that the debate will run and run. The only view that I will offer to you at this stage, and I'm very happy to hear your thoughts and questions, is that in my experience from the fairly good pole position of the chair in the chamber, my strong impression is that there is a large majority of British parliamentary colleagues who wish Britain to remain within the European Union. Now, there is an outline commitment that the British Prime Minister has given, which he is perfectly at liberty to give, and for which I wouldn't dream of criticising him, to hold a referendum at a future date, probably in 2017, on the back of what he hopes will be a renegotiated deal and agreement for Britain's terms of membership. And of course, if a referendum is held, anything could happen. But I simply want to advance the proposition that most of my colleagues in Parliament, including the Prime Minister, wish to remain in the EU, and it is my firm conviction that that will be the verdict of the British people as well. There is Euroscepticism in Britain. People are uneasy about aspects of what they perceive to be European entanglements. There is a resentment of bureaucracy, a discomfort with some of the onerous impact of European Union regulations and directives upon business, and a continuing unease about and apprehension regarding potential loss of identity within the Union. But all of those things said, it's my sense, not least from my own electorate, I'm a sitting member of Parliament for Buckingham in South East England towards the Midland, most people still, come the day, obliged to make a choice, forced to vote one on the other, would still rather be in than out. They may grumble, they may criticise, they may argue for change, but will they want to go marching through the exit door? I do not believe they will, and I don't myself think that the Prime Minister would want that outcome either. He has made it clear that he would much prefer Britain to remain in the Union. So, for criticisms, I'm very happy to hear them, and within the constraints of my impartial office, I shall endeavour to respond. But what I would like to do is to say something about the role of the Speaker, something about the reform underway in Parliament, and something about the respect in which I am seeking to add to the functions of the Speaker. First of all, on the subject of the role of the Speaker, it's perhaps worth emphasising that unlike in many other countries, colleagues, including many other democracies, the Speaker in the United Kingdom is obliged to be, and to be seen to be, entirely impartial and independent, that is to say, free of any party affiliation whatsoever. And the way in which we give effect to this principle and expectation, indeed to this obligation in the UK, is to demand that the Speaker, upon election to that office, shall resign his or her membership of the political party to which that Speaker previously belonged. So my predecessor was a Labour Member of Parliament who became Speaker, and when he became Speaker he resigned his membership of the British Labour Party. Before I became Speaker in June 2009, I had for 12 years been a Conservative Member of Parliament, but I tendered my resignation as a member of the Conservative Party the day that I became Speaker, because the House wants the Speaker to be and to be seen to be unconnected with party. I continue to sit as Member of Parliament for Buckingham, and in conformity with our convention, it is not a law but a convention, at the general election after I became Speaker, the general election in May 2010 in the United Kingdom, I stood as the Speaker seeking re-election in Buckingham, and again, by convention, the major parties do not, and they did not, stand against me. So there was no Conservative candidate, no Labour candidate, no Liberal Democrat candidate against me. The people who stood against me were minority party candidates. There was a fascist candidate from the British National Party and a UK independence candidate and various other assorted varieties of political opponent. The reason why the major parties don't stand against the Speaker is that they want to support the return to Parliament of the Speaker. I represent constituents in correspondence with ministers and other agencies, and if I'm still dissatisfied, and there is an issue that impacts upon a large number of my constituents, I address that matter by meeting with ministers. Ministers come to see me in Speaker's House, which is the home and set of offices of the Speaker in the UK Parliament. The Speaker does not speak in debates. The Speaker speaks in the UK Parliament only in his capacity as Speaker, that is to say, to keep order, to encourage people to take part, and to try to cut down on the number of people excluded altogether as a result of bad behaviour. And in that way, I am perhaps, by not speaking in Parliament, but by dealing with matters for my constituents through correspondence and meetings, quite similar to ministers, because ministers in the British Parliament do not speak in Parliament on constituency matters. They speak only in respect of their ministerial duties. I understand that my parliamentary colleague, Foreign Secretary William Hague, was in Vilnius recently, William Hague is a Member of Parliament for Richmond in Yorkshire in the north of England. William Hague does not speak in Parliament about health or education or transport or crime or social security or any of those matters. William Hague speaks in Parliament as Foreign Secretary, and I operate in a similar way. The only difference is that William as a minister can vote in Parliament, but of course as a minister he has to vote with the government. He can't vote just on the basis of some personal opinion he has on a particular issue. He's a member of the government and has to vote accordingly. The Speaker doesn't vote in the British Parliament unless there's a tie. And if there's a tie, the principle is that the Speaker votes to facilitate more discussion. So if a bill is at a very early stage, a piece of legislation, and there's a tie, the Speaker, if there's a tie, will vote aye, yes, to enable it to go into committee and be considered further. But if a piece of legislation, colleagues, is at its final stage, where it's a question of does it become law or does it fail, and there's a tie at what we call third reading, then the Speaker would vote no, because the presumption is that it is not for the Speaker to create a majority for a law if the House has not itself done so. Day to day, my responsibility, which is most visible and best known, is to chair the proceedings impartially as a referee, or if you prefer, if you are a fan of cricket or tennis, an umpire. And my task is to call people to ask questions of ministers and to make speeches in debates. And in deciding who to call, I am looking from side to side of the chamber, from government to opposition and back again. And if ever you watch the British Parliament, you may see that people are constantly standing up in question time. And you may think, and people often ask me at home in the UK, why are people standing up all the time like that? And the answer, colleagues, is that they are seeking to catch the eye of the Speaker. They are signalling to the Speaker, this matter interests me, please call me to say something. And it's up to the Speaker to know the name of every member. We have 650 members, so I have to know all of their names and preferably their constituencies. And I'm thinking I need to go from one side of the House to the other, to be fair. I need to call people who were elected 50 years ago, and there is one member in that category, and people who were elected, like in a by-election 3 months ago. Everybody must have a chance. I need to call men, but I need to call women who on the whole are less noisy and better behaved in the chamber, but who should still have the chance to speak. And I need to call people from England, but also from Scotland, and from Wales, but also from Northern Ireland, and from the north of England as well as the south of England, and the west of England and the east of England. And I need to be aware, colleagues, let us say, as your director mentioned the subject in relation to the vexed but controversial question of relations with the European Union, of broadly where people stand. Because the role of the Speaker is to ensure a decent array of opinion is articulated. So it's up to me to know, not just from one party to another, but within the parties, who is very, very Eurosceptic, and who is very Europhile, yes, relatively anti, relatively pro, and who perhaps is in the middle. And similarly on Israel, Palestine, it's up to me to have a body of knowledge about where my colleagues stand and to seek the maximum diversity in the expression of opinion. Most recently, this may be of interest to you, we had a highly controversial and important debate on a piece of legislation to introduce equal marriage in the United Kingdom, marriage for members of the LGBT community, and there were 66 people who wanted to speak from the back benches, apart from the minister and the shadow minister. And I wanted them all to have a chance to speak, and the only way we could do it was by having a strict time limit of 4 minutes per speech. And I wanted, again, to get as much balance as possible. In the end, we got everybody in. But it was, again, up to me to have some idea whether people were going to be for the bill or against the bill. And as I say, it's not for the Speaker to take sides in the matter. I have a view on that matter, and if constituents ask me, I tell them. But in my role chairing, I'm not there to advance one agenda or another. I'm there to ensure that people can advance their own agendas and to be, if you like, the leader of the good order and fair play party. What are those pigs I see flying in front of my very eyes? Of course not, colleagues, because there are always people who are absolutely convinced there's no debate that would not be improved by a contribution from them of great eloquence and considerable length. And there are colleagues who are pleased if they're called to speak, and they go away looking very grumpy if they're not called to speak. But I'm just doing my best to accommodate as many people as possible. And the speaker has a duty to try to include minority voices from minority parties as well. And if there are matters of government policy where there are dissidents on the government side who disagree with their view, or on the opposition side there are dissidents who disagree with their party leadership, the speaker's role is to protect their right to speak. The party whips would prefer them to be silent and have sticking plaster over their mouths because they don't want to hear them, but the speaker's role is to stand up for the rights of the ordinary member. Now, at various times, colleagues, in our history, that has really been the sum total of what the speaker has done, to chair the proceedings of the chamber. But when I stood for election as speaker in 2009, it was in the aftermath of the reputational carnage inflicted by our expenses scandal, a row about the reimbursement of costs incurred by MPs and how much money MPs could claim for travel and housing and so on. So our reputation was very low. And I argued to colleagues that, of course, we needed to remove an outdated and discredited system of expense reimbursement and to put in its place something that was more equitable, transparent, audited, and accountable. But we also needed to do something more if we were to have any chance of restoring the reputation of Parliament, and that was for Parliament itself to assert the rights of Parliament. And part of my thesis to you as students is that for much of the post-war period in the United Kingdom, the power of Parliament has decreased, and for much of that period, the power of government, of the executive branch, as we call it, has increased, and the two have become out of balance. And I argued to my colleagues that one function the speaker could help to perform would be to embolden Parliament. And I said, look, if you elect me, I will try to ensure that more people can speak in debates and question ministers, and if ministers give long-winded answers, I will try to interrupt, because it's important that colleagues representing their constituencies should be able to question ministers properly. And I think it is ridiculous that important statements of policy by ministers are not being made in the chamber of the House, as they should be, but are being made on news broadcasts and through tip-offs to friendly newspapers. If you elect me as Speaker, I intend to insist that ministers make these announcements in Parliament, and I intend to revive the opportunities for members who ask me for such permission to question ministers urgently. We have a procedure called the urgent question, capital U, capital Q, on matters that have just arisen or where there's been some new development or crisis or unfolding event where maybe the minister, for whatever reason, hasn't offered to come to the House to explain it and to answer questions. If a member applies to me for permission urgently to question the minister, I am empowered to give him or her that opportunity. To give you an example, in the year before I became Speaker, we had 2 urgent questions allowed in Parliament. In my first year, I think we had 24. And over the last 3.5 years, we've had more like 124. Because across the field of government activity, it is in the nature of things that matters keep arising which members feel must absorb the attention of the House. And one of the consequences of increasing the number of urgent questions is that members of Parliament now feel that the chamber is a place worth attending, because they can actually raise something that is topical as opposed to something that isn't. And one of the consequences of having more such questions is that the broadcasters, the media, have to report that this questioning is taking place, And ladies and gentlemen, they basically have no choice but to report that the question is taking place not in a television studio or a radio station, but in the chamber of the House of Commons. So regularly on Sky News in the UK, at around lunchtime, it will say, urgent question in the House of Commons on security breach at so-and-so airport, or whatever the issue is. And ministers get a couple of hours' notice, and they have to come to the House. Now, I am probably a dartboard in the offices of ministers' diary secretaries, because their schedule often has to be rearranged. But I hope that as students you won't think it very arrogant of me if I say that that is a matter of no concern to the Speaker, because the responsibility of the Speaker is not to organise Parliament for the convenience of the Minister. The responsibility of the Speaker is to chair, and insofar as it's within his power, to organise the proceedings of Parliament in order to meet the requirements of the members of the legislature, and through them, the interests of the electorate. And although, unlike the United States, we do not have a separation of powers in the UK, so ministers, of course, sit in Parliament, it's important, if you take any interest in UK politics, to understand that the vast majority of members of the House of Commons are not members of the government. We have about 80 members of the government in the House of Commons. Does anybody in this audience know how many members of the House of Commons there are? I think I'm dependent upon my secretary here to point out, because he half had his hand up, that the figure is indeed 650. So 570 members of Parliament are not members of the government. And their responsibility, whether they're government backbenchers or opposition backbenchers, is to question, to probe, to scrutinise, to challenge, to hold the government of the day to account. And increasingly, I hope that's what they're able to do. Now, when I stood for election, I also said, look, I think it's ridiculous, frankly ridiculous, in 2009, as it then was, that the chairs of the important select committees which scrutinise the executive are hand-picked by representatives of that very executive, because the chairs of our key committees used to be chosen by government and opposition whips as a kind of prize, if you will. And I said, I think the House ought to decide whether it wants to elect the chairs of these committees, make its own choice, preferably by secret ballots of these government whips and opposition whips, these people responsible for party discipline, are not in the driving seat, but the House takes control of these matters for itself. And there's no members coming up to me in private conversation bemoaning their fate as downtrodden backbenchers trampled on by their party leadership or the government of the day, unless they're prepared to get off their knees and assert themselves. And I'm pleased to say that I was able to persuade the then government, it was a Labour government, to put these matters to the vote before the last election, and the House voted that from the start of the 2010 Parliament, the chairs of committees would in future be elected by secret ballot of the whole House, and I confess I rejoice in that. Those committees now have their members also elected by the parties, and so automatically they have had conferred upon them a greater legitimacy and democratic credibility than they previously enjoyed, and naturally that has empowered and emboldened them to launch new inquiries in policy matters and to challenge the government of the day, which is a good thing for Parliament and for the electorate, but it's actually good for government, because if you have all-powerful government and an enfeebled Parliament, it's like having the driving of a racing car at 100 miles an hour. The thrill of the speed might be exhilarating for the driver, but the result is likely to be fatal. And similarly, if you've got a very, very, very strong government and a weak Parliament just doing what it's told, kowtowing and not really challenging, that's bad for democracy and bad for the quality of government. It leads to complacency and error and blunder. So I like to think that that election of select committee chairs has helped, and we now also have, as I argued with others we should have, a thing called the backbench business committee that schedules the business, chooses the topics for debate 35 days a year. So instead of it all being done by the government, members of Parliament can choose the subjects they want to debate, some of which might be inconvenient for the government, but which nevertheless are of great interest to the public. They might even be the subject of large-scale e-petitions. So the public want them to be debated. and the House has in a sense now taken on responsibility for protecting the public interest in promoting some of these matters for debate and in some cases for a vote. So, are we dramatically transformed? I make no such claim. Whether I'm any good as speaker is not for me to say, but I'm trying to do what it said on the tin and to inject a degree of dynamism and topicality into the proceedings of Parliament, which for some period we have lacked, and to try to do something to catapult the backbench ordinary member of Parliament from the stalls of parliamentary life to centre stage. The last thing I want to say to you is that I mentioned that I would try to add, and am seeking to add, one further element to the role of the chair. When I stood for election, colleagues, as Speaker in June 2009, I had 9 opponents, there were 10 candidates, and I argued that whilst respecting and absolutely being committed to safeguard the traditional and important impartiality of the Speaker as between the parties, the Speaker nevertheless could be an ambassador for Parliament and a robust advocate of democratic politics who got out a bit more, went to visit schools, went to visit universities, went to visit voluntary bodies, went to visit charitable institutions, went to those bodies with the intention of talking about the role of the Speaker and the functioning of democracy and how we're changing and why we matter and in what way people could engage with the House. Now you may think, well, this is a very unremarkable thing to propose, but the thing you need to understand, because these matters all depend upon context, is that traditionally the British Speaker hasn't really done that. The Speaker of the House of Commons has been a rather internalised figure, dressed up in a fancy uniform and largely inaccessible to the outside world. So when I said this, one of my very senior colleagues, who's no longer in the House of Commons, who was standing for election as Speaker, almost exploded and said, "Colleagues, I'm bound to say, in the course of these proceedings over recent weeks, I have heard some very curious utterances about the intended course of the British speakership to which I myself aspire. I've heard a number of people, notably my honourable friend, the member for Buckingham, arguing that the Speaker should become what he chooses to call an ambassador for Parliament and a robust advocate of democratic politics. And I am simply obliged, in all candour, no discourtesy to my honourable friend, to say to my colleagues that I think that if the Speaker were to undertake daily interviews upon Sky News, it would be profoundly injurious to the reputation of Parliament. And I said to him, well, Patrick, if I had been arguing that, you would be justified in criticising me, but I was not, and therefore you are not. I wasn't suggesting for one moment that the Speaker should do sort of daily interviews on matters of political controversy. Of course the Speaker shouldn't do that. The Speaker has to be recognised as impartial. What I was arguing is that the Speaker ought to be, to some extent, a spokesperson for the institution. In other words, I may be impartial and have to be within the chamber, but it doesn't mean that I have to be impartial about the chamber. It may be that I have to be impartial between the parties, but it doesn't mean that I have to be impartial about the merits of a democratic system. It may be that I won't say to people, I have a particular view about this issue or that issue on which you should engage with Parliament, but I can be firmly of the view that people should have the opportunity to engage with Parliament. And that's what I've done, and I do it by getting out and about, but also by welcoming on a bigger scale groups to Parliament and to Speaker's House to talk about the democratic process and to celebrate great causes in our national life. We have regular charitable events in Speaker's House in my state rooms 3 or 4 times a week. I visit schools every single month, sometimes weekly, in a way that the Speaker didn't used to do. And we have the UK Youth Parliament meeting annually to debate the issues that it has voted to debate on a non-sitting Friday, when the House wouldn't be sitting otherwise, on the floor of the House of Commons. Now, to give you an example, I decided I would chair these debates, and a very senior member, who's also no longer a member of the House, came up to me when he heard this and said, I understand, Mr. Speaker, you're going to chair the debates of the United Kingdom Youth Parliament in the Chamber. And I said, yes, that's right. Let me tell you, he said, it will be a complete and unmitigated disaster for the House of Commons. And I said to him, I don't agree with that at all. But what makes you say that? And I know what I'm talking about. I've been here 39 years. And I said, no, I know exactly when you were elected in a by-election in September 1971 in Macclesfield in northwest England, etc., etc. I know all that. But what I'm asking is, what's your thesis? What's your argument? What's your contention? And he eventually, after quite a lot of bluff and bluster, said to me, you mark my words, Mr. Speaker, if those young people come into the chamber to debate their issues, at the very least, chewing gum will be left all over the chamber. And at the worst, he said, you mark my words, penknives will be used and damage will be inflicted upon these benches which I love. And I said to him, I'm really sorry to hear you say that. You're entitled to your view, but I think it's a grotesque caricature of and slur upon the young people who I predict to you will be proud to come, will speak well, and will behave a darn sight better than we do most days of the week. And I know it's never popular, colleagues, when you say I was right, but I was right on all three counts. They do, they now come every year, it's accepted, and you think as young people what it means to those people in the cultivation of their skills of public advocacy and the injection and development of their own self-confidence to have that chance. And I just think that you have to think outside the box, and if we want in Parliament, at the British Parliament, as parliamentarians here would want to be respected by young people, then we have to show respect for young people. Respect is a two-way street. So we are a very traditional democracy. We have hallowed and long-established ways of doing things, but we are trying to move with the times, to reform, to keep the best of our parliamentary system and to improve the rest. And it's in that spirit that I've come to the University of Vilnius and the Institute of International Relations and Political Science today to talk to you. It's been a great privilege for me to do so. I am in urgent need of the consumption of a glass of water. And you will be incredibly relieved, ladies and gentlemen, to know that my speech is at an end and your observations are about to begin. Thank you very much.